Last time on Voices of the Completed Life.
My physical body, the shell, is gotten very fragile. And frankly, I think COVID has being on lockdown for over a year now, semi-lockdown for part of that, has contributed. I think my muscle strength has lessened considerably as you know, I wasn't out walking so much. And so I think that's been a problem too. And, you know, my guess is, like I say, that I'm one fall away from no longer being able to be independent. So that puts me in a more urgent position for completing my life. I do not have a terminal illness. I'm not eligible for hospice. And there's other services that hospice provides that I'm not eligible for. I'm not eligible for some of the pain management techniques, some of the counseling. So what I learned from all of that was that I didn't want to participate in the Death with Dignity program as it's currently implemented.
The Completed Life Initiative presents Voices of the Completed Life. In each episode, we share unprecedented conversations at the heart of the human experience. Our hosts dive into honest dialogue about mortality, loss, and grief, as we hear firsthand from individuals who seek to avoid life-limiting maladies in a body that may no longer serve them, and who instead aim to celebrate their lives as completed. These are stories that may challenge and surprise you. These stories are worth listening to. These are Voices of the Completed Life. You've just heard Sheryl describe her current predicament. We want you to be aware that the contents of this podcast include mention of death and dying, and it introduces the idea of self-determination. In our first episode, we heard how Sheryl's physical pain has become debilitating. Sheryl reminds us she is just one fall away from finding herself engrossed in ongoing medical care that might threaten her ability to control the circumstances and timing of her own death. Without a terminal illness or proof of immediate decline, Sheryl feels limited in her current reality. Her physical body is beginning to deteriorate, and she envisions enduring years-long discomfort. In a moment, we'll return to Sheryl, who will tell us her intentions for her completed life. When Sheryl wrote to us in October 2021, she was already sure of her plan. The contents of this podcast are meant for informational purposes only. This podcast content is not intended to substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you or a loved one are in crisis or emotional distress, please seek out the help of a mental health practitioner or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Agents are available 24 hours a day and can communicate in English and Spanish. Listeners outside of the United States of America should call their local emergency line. And now, back to our conversation with Sheryl.
Hi, Sheryl. Welcome back. For those listening in, I'm your host, Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel, Program Director of the Completed Life Initiative. Sheryl, thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor to have you share your story with us. When you wrote about the Inuits in Alaska having a profound impact on how you came to perceive death as a young person, I was wondering, what was the most important quality of Inuit practice? And how did it give you meaning as a young person?
Well, according to the story, the older women their main job in the community was to help soften the hides that could then be made into clothing and moccasins and other items. And they did that by chewing them. That wore down their teeth. And when their teeth were worn down so much that they could no longer provide the service to the community, they would go off on their own and die out in the frozen snow and ice. I really like that concept of as long as you can contribute to your community, you still have value. And as long as you have value, then life could be good. In my own life, I volunteered with an organization that retrieved usable items from the Portland dump. We would collect it from the dump and bring it back to our facility, clean it up, and sell it back to the neighborhood and at a really reduced cost. So we were not only saving things from the landfill, we were providing the neighborhood, which was a lower income neighborhood, with serviceable furniture and other items. It gave me so much pleasure to be doing something like that. So that's how I put that idea of as long as you could provide services to the community, you had value. I got to the place where I couldn't do that work anymore. I was the principal pricer in the store, which meant standing on my feet for a long time and doing research and then pricing items, moving items around. And I have arthritis in my neck. The pain got to be too much to be able to concentrate on the work. So I've had to stop doing that. And that was a big loss for me because of the story about the Inuit. There's currently nationwide, worldwide maybe, there's a debate about whether or not any of these suicides are ethical from a medical profession's point of view. They certainly all result in somebody killing themselves, but the motivations are quite different. Rather than being caused by a mental illness, a rational suicide responds to a totally different set of personal standards, including things like loss of autonomy, inability to be a contributing member of society, which was very important to me, constant but not terminal pain, and a loss of physical ability to do joyous activities, and a feeling that your life is complete. You've done it all and feel good about it. I had a good life. Now I want to have a good death. And unfortunately, there's no way right now for a senior citizen to say, hey, I'm 80 years old now and I'm done with my life. It's complete. I'm finished. I don't want to continue to use up resources to support me that could be used to support somebody else. I think the completed life death, I never figured out what to call that, what it is the way to meet these needs. So I clearly decided at this point what I was going to do. And that was the rational suicide. Now, once you decide that, then you got other things you have to do. There's other steps in your action plan to accomplish. And some of them they seem insurmountable at times. My primary care doctor, when I first approached him and told him that this is what I was planning, he had a personal crisis of ethics, and it just kind of blew his mind, frankly. And he asked my permission to talk to somebody about it. For him, he wanted to talk to somebody about it. And I said, sure. And so the next day I get a call from another doctor who was on the ethics committee. And I spent about an hour talking to her on the phone. And she was very supportive of what I was saying and doing. And she even asked if I would consider coming and talking to the ethics committee. And that's not happened, and I don't know if it will at this point. But anyway, it was a fun idea. Suicide's got so many taboos around it, but there are actually a number of different kinds of suicide. There's emotional suicide, or there's rational suicide. There's assisted suicide, which is similar to what the Death with Dignity program does, which is using prescribed medicine. But in all these suicides, it's all these different kinds of suicides, they're all legal, but you must be able to take action on your own. No one can help you. People can watch you, be with you, but can do nothing to interfere with your actions. There's a huge legal risk for people helping you. They can be charged with murder. So I take that possibility very seriously. And even though I have good support, nobody has been involved in the planning of this other than myself. So an emotional suicide is usually associated with mental health issues like depression. A rational suicide is one that where the perpetrator, I haven't thought of that myself as that before, but yes, the person who's going to commit suicide can demonstrate that their death is the end result of careful and rational and logical planning. In my case, I've done my will and my power of attorneys are all set up. My cremation is prepaid. I have been closing my accounts. I've been canceling my credit cards. I've been, everything that will leave behind a clear planning on my part. The first part I looked at was, well, how was I going to commit suicide? I couldn't figure out how to get access to illegal drugs. And I wasn't at all comfortable about going to the dark web and trying to buy something. Besides, I would have no idea of the efficacy of what I was buying. And I guess at this point, my biggest fear was that I would do something that would cause brain death, but leave a living husk behind, which would just be horrendous. And then guns, knives, that was just too messy. And again, you don't know how final your effort would be. I knew a person who tried using a shotgun to the face, and he survived. So I don't want that. A couple of years ago, I discovered the book Final Exit by Derek Humphrey. It's an international bestseller. He is a believer in suicide that's associated with terminal illness. He's not necessarily a supporter of completed life suicide, but he offers guidance. He offers information. He offers information, not guidance, on different ways that you can commit suicide. And I picked the use of an inert gas, in this case nitrogen, because it seemed like it was accessible. It was painless. It used common materials. Big Pharma is not part of this at all. I was able to buy my nitrogen tank and accessories within a few blocks of my house. Took a fair amount of courage to walk through the door, though, and buy these things. I took time to learn about nitrogen and that it's under pressure and have to have a special tank and special control dials and etc. So that if I was asked what I want, I had to be able to answer questions. I also learned how to make nitro coffee in case somebody wanted to know why I was buying this. I also found in this exploration process that the people that supply some of these parts that are needed have been informed that they are assisting suicide and they will not sell you what you need. They will only sell to medical facilities. I mean, at this point, it seemed like there were so many, for every one roadblock I cleared, there was another one, and then another one, and then another one. Why does it matter to these people? I don't know. They're fearful. It's pretty amazing. I was trying to get a special regulator, and I've been told that the store I called about it, they said, oh, well, we don't sell except to medical facilities because these are used for suicide. And I said, what? And she says, oh, you'd be surprised how many calls we get for this. So, and just as an aside, by not giving us the correct regulators, they may be causing more harm by having people be brain dead, but not dead. But they don't seem to think about that. Helium used to be the inert gas of choice and was a lot easier to use than the nitrogen, but the balloon stores didn't want their products associated with suicide. So they've mixed this nitrogen with oxygen, which doesn't prevent the damage from occurring, but it prevents the death. I would love to see statistics again about how many instances of this we have. And as people go forward with more legislation, they need to get this kind of information.
It sounds like it was a really long process to research all of these elements. How long did that process take you?
Oh, it took me years because, well, for one, partly it was because I wasn't doing it solidly for years, but it was always kind of in the back of my mind. Until I found the Final Exit book, I could only think in terms of illegal drugs and how in the world would I get hold of those and the inequities of that market, if you will. It seems like the poor people have access to all the illegal drugs, and the rich people have access to all the illegal drugs. And us poor guys in the middle, but I was trying to concoct schemes of sitting in the park bench and saying trying to stop people as they were going by and say, hey, gotten any whatever to sell, or dressing up in my fancy clothes and approaching the man in the hotel lobby that was responsible for servicing, getting things that the customers needed. I figured they've got to have sources too, because you hear the stories about the businessmen and the basketball players, and so that took me a long time until I found that book, and then it was pretty clear. The choice was clear.
You're listening to Voices of the Completed Life, a podcast brought to you by the Completed Life Initiative. Learn more about the Completed Life Initiative and donate to our cause at www.completedlife.org. We provide groundbreaking presentations about the right to control one's own end-of-life experience. We explore legislative options for expanding the eligibility criteria for medical aid in dying within the United States and look to other countries around the globe in support of the right to die. We empower people to ask, what does it mean to live a completed life? Spread the word about the completed life on social media by using #CompletedLife. And now, back to our episode. As a reminder, the contents of this podcast are meant for informational purposes only. This podcast content is not intended to substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you or a loved one are in crisis or emotional distress, please seek out the help of a mental health practitioner or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Agents are available 24 hours a day and can communicate in English and Spanish. Listeners outside of the United States of America should call their local emergency line. Welcome back to the podcast.
The biggest issue that's been the most difficult is the when. Because you want to be able to maintain your autonomy and control. You have to have the physical ability to use whatever equipment you're going to use, and you have to have a hell of a lot of bravery. If you wait too long, you may not be able to pull it off. If you do it too soon, you're losing valuable time with your grandkids or whatever. And it's really hard to figure it out. What I did was I developed 3 criteria for myself that I felt would indicate that time was near. One was that I would be able to continue to do the volunteer work that I was doing and contributing to society that way. The second one was that I would be able to continue to live independently in my house. And the third one was that I would be able to continue to maintain my garden and work in my garden, because that to me is my sanctuary, is my garden. I realized that I had reached the point. Each of those criteria had been triggered. In other words, I've had several bad falls. Living independently is getting increasingly difficult. And I feel like I'm one fall away from being put off into a assisted living. So that's pretty terrifying. And then my garden, I can still do some things out there, but it's getting increasingly difficult. But I love that creativity, and I like to do craft projects, mixed media projects. That's hard to do now too, because I've got a little bit of a shake in my painting hand, my right hand. So, it's just like my physical body. The shell is gotten very fragile. And frankly, I think COVID has being on lockdown for over a year now, semi-lockdown for part of that, has contributed. I think my muscle strength has lessened considerably as, I wasn't out walking so much. And so I think that's been a problem too. And, my guess is, like I say, I'm one fall away from no longer being able to be independent.
At the Completed Life Initiative, we're so curious to hear how you heard of us and what it meant to you to connect with us. And really, what about the Completed Life resonates with you most? There's been many hints of this throughout what you've shared today, but in your own words, I'd like you to talk briefly about what the Completed Life means to you.
I've found it very fulfilling to know that I wasn't just out here all by myself thinking up these things. And I was so pleased that I got such a positive response. And I encourage you to go forcefully forward. The need for providing people the choice of having a gentle death is only going to increase. I see we pretty much have gotten distracted from the fact of global warming happening with all the political nonsense we're going through. But we're going to have a lot of people that are not going to have, our resources are going to be constrained. We're going to have many, many more people to deal with. Water is going to be scarce. Clean water, drinking water is going to be scarce. Many of our places that supply our food are in serious drought zones now. Every time I go to the grocery store, I'm amazed to see how full our shelves still are, because I know like how many of our vegetables are grown in Mexico and Guatemala and countries like that can't even feed their own people now. Medicines, medical services, all the service industries are going to be overwhelmed. We're going to have most of the migrants at the southern border are climate change migrants, fleeing places that can no longer support life. And we just have to make this easier for people. It's the compassionate thing to do. We have to get the people that are in our way, because they are in a minority, that are in our way to having a gentle death, out of the way, because they are not helping us move forward at all. So I need you guys to keep up that good work. I know I have a good friend that's going to volunteer with you, looking to find her place within your organization or in whatever capacity. I've talked to a lot of people who are my age or younger, and they're more in the baby boomer age. And when I tell them that there are options to dying, you can have choices even. They are surprised, partly because they've never thought about it. We still won't think about death. And then partly because they're just ignorant of it. They don't understand what's available. I'm telling people about it as much as I can, having them tell their neighbors and their friends, and giving them some sense of places to call, resources, and doing what I can. Social action's been always very important to me.
Well, Sheryl, you have my assurance that we at the Completed Life Initiative will keep going, and we will connect with as many people as possible. Really, having the conversation is the first important step. As you shared, people in the baby boomer generation not being aware that these options exist means we have to have these conversations in order to move the dial just a little bit forward, in order to allow them and empower them to craft their end-of-life experience in a way that aligns with their values and the way that they've lived their life. I think it's beautiful that you've shared that you've done everything you've wanted to do. So what would you like people to take away from our conversation today? At some point, we'll have people listen and we really want to share your story. What would you like them to take away?
What I'd like people to take away from my story is the fact that there are choices to how to die. You do not have to suffer. You do not have to lose control. You can manage it yourself. The fact that people are fighting for your right to do this, and they need your support. Talk to your clergy about it. Get them informed and educated as well. Getting mainstream religion involved in this is really important to balance out the extreme. Did I cover the bases? I think so.
I'm always a big proponent of talking to your family and friends. And if clergy is important to you, we should bring them into the conversation as well. You've done a beautiful job of not only writing down in such an articulate and clear manner your entire journey from the beginning up until now, writing how you've internalized everything and what is important to you, upholding your voice and your autonomy and your independence to live, to garden, and to live in the house that you love. By sharing your story, you empower others to do the same.
And I also shared my paper with my mental health counselor, and they are using it now in their team meetings to talk about these different things. So I felt really rewarded because the conversation has started, and that just, made me feel really good. And periodically, my counselor will give me a call and say, the team wondered if you had thought about this. And so, yeah, it's great. So people are almost hungry for some of this, I think, because they, anybody who watches what goes on and thinks about it can see the hole that needs to be filled. It takes me back to the Inuit story. I mean, we don't know what scarce resources mean here in this country, really.
I just want to thank you so much for your bravery and courage to share your story with us, and deep appreciation and gratitude to you out there.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you and other members of the initiative.
Before we began, Sheryl shared her understanding of an Inuit practice. Women who were in charge of softening animal hides would excuse themselves from their community. Sheryl saw this as a preservation tactic. Contributions to society were important to her, and she valued above all things her ability to participate in life. Her knowledge of limited resources and her principles of independence and interconnection brought Sheryl to complete her life in November of 2021. In our next episode, we will share a response to this episode, featuring guest speakers who will talk about the ethical themes and concerns that may arise from listening to Sheryl's story. Those who wish to join us for the live event should go to completedlife.org to sign up for email notifications about our upcoming events, or find us on social media platforms to stay up to date. Speaking to Sheryl was a tremendous honor, and we are humbled to share her story. Thank you. This has been Voices of the Completed Life. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us at www.completedlife.org. That's completedlife.org, where you'll find extensive video content regarding resources on aid in dying, featuring discussions led by expert clinicians, bioethicists, policymakers, and end-of-life doulas. At the Completed Life Initiative, we advocate for a person's right to direct their own end-of-life care. Take control over your transition, your life, your choice.